Hello, and welcome to the Inner Chamber. My name is Robin. I am a mother of 5, a wife of 40 years, and a third-degree initiate and high priestess within the tradition of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel for more than 20 years. We are familiar with the saying that when the student is ready, a teacher and/or traditions will appear. And I believe very much that this is indeed the case. We live in a time where there is the availability through all manner of resources, teachers, schools, books, readings, everything and anything that you can find about any sort of esoteric tradition or path. I also firmly believe that because of that, it is a need to have discernment in who we choose as our sources of learning, who we choose as our community, and also who we choose ultimately as those who we draw from to evolve, to grow, and to inform our own spiritual path. It is with this spirit that with this first video, I would like to share a little bit about my own experiences and my own philosophies regarding esoteric practice and magic and everything that comes in between and surrounds all of those topics. I must say that my spiritual journey began much, much further back. In fact, further back to the point where I was a child. And one of my most profound spiritual experiences actually occurred when I was about 10 years old. I had always wanted to be a professional ballerina. From the time I can remember, that was all that I ever wanted to do. I was told that my grandmother actually danced me to sleep when I was a baby, so maybe that had a little bit of something to do with it. I don't know. All I know is that the thought of being able to move with such grace and such ease was the only thing that inspired me, the only thing that I wanted to do. I grew up with my mother and my grandmother, and because it was just the 3 of us, often my mom would be working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. So the thought of formal ballet lessons did not actually materialize until I was almost 13, which is actually a little late to begin pursuing a professional career. Nonetheless, I was not to be dissuaded by that, and all of my free time and summers were spent at the library checking out the same 2 books every month. One, a handbook of training for classical ballet, and the second one, a book about my idol at that time, the Russian ballerina Anna Pavlova. I guess you could say that Pavlova was my deity that I offered devotion up to. She inspired me. Her story was one that I wished to replicate in my own life. All of my thoughts centered around being a professional ballerina, traveling the world, having my own company, and being able to share the joy that is given when an audience comes and partakes of the energy that the artist has to share with them. My grandmother was a musician, and I spent a lot of time with her. So our house was filled with classical music, opera, and ballet. And she would often accompany me as I put to use my time in creating these little shows that would be multiple personas that I would put on to entertain my mom and my grandmom. So when the opportunity, when I was in 6th grade, came to perform at the 6th grade talent show, I jumped at that opportunity. The thing that I wanted to perform was a piece that was made famous by Pavlova called The Dying Swan. My grandmother was the one who was going to be accompanying me, of course, and she also provided encouragement in all manner of musical pursuits and just in learning how to express myself. So, the story of The Dying Swan. It is about this beautiful, ethereal creature that is soaring in the skies, surveying the domain that they see beneath them. And a hunter catches sight of this swan. A bullet is shot, and the swan gracefully descends down to earth, and in the midst of her final death throes, looks up at the heavens and the sky, which she once dominated. And that is the last vision that she sees. It is a tale of the beauty and the grace of this being as death is approaching, and as it knows that death is approaching as well. So this, of course, was something that I poured all of my heart and my passion into, in being able to use this as a tool to offer up devotion to Pavlova, who was my deity that I worshipped. The day of the performance, my grandmother sat at the side of the stage, ready to play the first musical notes that would cue me into beginning this particular piece. It's a very short piece. It's only about maybe 4 minutes in length, if even that. And in those 4 minutes, it tells the whole story of this swan's demise. And I remember stepping up onto the stage. I remember standing in the side wings of the wooden stage that was at my elementary school. And I remember hearing those first beautiful sounds of piano that were the introduction to the swan entering. I remember offering up my devotion to Pavlova and asking that she help and aid in me fully representing and honoring this beautiful image that she had once conveyed herself. As the music reached out, suddenly wings carried me up into the heavens. Suddenly, I looked down upon a landscape of grass and water. My long neck arched as I was flying in the sky, carried on the currents of the wind. I breathed in deeply all of this energy, all of this panoramic view. I, Robin, me, the physical being, was no longer present. There were no confines of a stage. In fact, there was no music either. I was that swan. I flew and I soared until a soundless bullet pierced my heart. I found a current of wind that would gently and gracefully carry me down in my descent as I moved towards the grass and the earth below, my life's blood ebbing from me. I landed on that grass, and I smelled the life that was contained within it. I felt the softness, the caress of it, knowing that it would be my final resting place. And in one final gasp, I lifted my head up towards the sky, taking in the vision of what I once was queen of and would no longer see. Wings outstretched in one final beating as they drew all of the air, the smell, the grass, all of my life's being into folding over, my head resting down, and blackness. The thing that roused me out of this was actually the sound of the applause. And slowly, my own form re-entered into the physical properties of me being the dancer on the wooden floor, folded over in the graceful pose that is the final pose of the dying swan. And I remember standing up and being very, very disoriented about, and unsure, I must say also as well, about what I had just experienced. All I knew was that at that moment and at that time, I had experienced something that was profound in its nature. But being a 10-year-old, I didn't know exactly how or what that thing was. I just knew that it was something that was not ordinary at all. After that experience, that propelled me into deepening my connection to ballet, into deepening my passion and my desire to become a classical ballerina. My devotion to that art form took on the form of a spiritual experience. As I pursued my dancing and was finally able to take classes, I remember that entering the classroom each day for me was a sacred experience. Coming into that dark classroom, waiting for class to begin, doing my stretches to prepare for class, all of these were acts of devotion that were comparable in measure to everything that I do now in preparing and entering sacred space for a ritual. As my career blossomed and I was actually able to perform with several ballet companies, my temple of devotion then became the stage. Preparing before I entered onto that stage, that ground that was the holiest of holies, and more importantly, being able to morph and to transform into whatever was called for the role that I was currently taking on, the mantle, you could say, that I was currently taking on, the magical persona that then the audience who would come in seeking respite from the mundane and the ordinary could fly and soar and transform with me into whatever that world could be. For me, this was the ultimate act and path of service as well. Being in service and giving all that I had to give of my being and of my love and my passion for something that to me was transcendent of a spiritual experience. To the audience who was sitting there and being able to carry and transport them for X amount of time. You also have to remember that for someone who performs in a theater, time stands still. So when we talk about time, no time in our esoteric pursuits, for anyone who has engaged in any performing activity, we understand that in a way that to some people might not be comprehensible. In other words, or for example, when you are performing, often you get to the theater very early in the morning so that you can do your run-throughs, take your classes, do your stage blocking, get fitted, make sure there are any changes, whatever. You spend your entire day because by the time the performance comes around and is said and done and everything is packed up and you're ready to go home for the evening, it's often somewhere around 11 or midnight, sometimes maybe even a little later by the time you actually wind down from all of the energy that you have gathered into yourself from that action. So when I say time has no meaning, for the time that you are in that space, literally there could be a war, there could be anything going on outside of that theater, and you would be totally oblivious to it unless it was brought obviously into the theater space. But you have no concept, and in fact your thoughts are very far away from anything that is occurring outside of that theater space and that world that you are in for that moment. Sounds a lot to me like sacred space when you enter into ritual or you enter into a deep meditation and you are, for that time period, transported somewhere else. And we've all been in rituals where we could easily say that we felt during the course of the ritual that we had to have been in that space for 2 or maybe even 3 hours. It just felt as though everything was extended out. And then you actually leave sacred space, close everything down, you look at your watch, and it's been maybe 1 hour, if that. So there's a bit of a time manipulation there that goes on. And this was something, again, that I was able to partake of, as well as offer to those who came to see the performances. I had the blessing of studying and ultimately performing until the birth of our twins when I was 33. So I had a very long time to spend in this realm of spirituality that was not what was considered the traditional or the norm. During that time, and because I had also grown up in a household that was very much encouraging of me exploring all manner of spiritual pursuits, I also became very much interested in a lot of the Eastern philosophies and practices. I am an avid reader. I've read, again, since I can remember, and I would literally devour books on the stories about the yogis, the famous yogis, and the experiences that were had in pursuing some of the yogic tradition and some of the Eastern practices with energetic protocol. I also am very versed in Western Hermetics as well. In fact, the start of that experience occurred probably, I would say I was around the age of 13 or 14, and it was another age of exploring a variety of things. And at that time, witchcraft was kind of defined by either being black or white. There was not a lot of books around about witchcraft. It was all very secretive, and being a teenager, you know, my first forays into that were all about the spells. Less about what it actually was and more about the spell work. But more about that later in another video. So I have been able to, because of a very supportive household, to bring and gather together a variety of different sources of information in a way that have truly informed the practice that I have. I have my practice that I use as High Priestess of a Coven within our tradition that falls within the scope and realms of what my tradition is. And again, I am very blessed to be part of the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel, which is fundamentally a Wiccan tradition, but we incorporate a very syncretic manner in all of our endeavors, incorporating astrology and Kabbalah and some of the Eastern practices and a variety of different pantheons and use within each of our covens, which is very diverse, based primarily on leadership as well as those members. And so we have an opportunity to share a variety of different truths that are truths for different practices and bring them all together into a syncretic whole that makes for something that is very diverse and very unique in its structure. So again, I am very fortunate that I am part of this type of endeavor because it also allows me in my own private spiritual practice to pursue other ways of expressing myself as a spiritual being, as a witch, as a magic worker, as an author, as a ritualist, as a ceremonialist. The list can go on exponentially in parallel with what it is that I am interested in. The inner chamber that I am calling this particular YouTube channel evolved from my thought of a nautilus shell. And the thought that within each of the chambers that are within that nautilus shell, there is some special energy. There is something different within each of those tiny little channels, especially as it curls in on itself. But the entire picture, the entire tapestry of it, is one that is of beauty, of mystery, of intrigue. So as we move through these different video series that I'm planning for this, I hope that you will find something that will be relevant to your own particular practice. As the months move forward, I'm planning several different tracks that we'll be using. We'll be using some of the cornerstones of all esoteric practices, such as astrology, tarot, Kabbalistic practice in the Hermetic sense. We'll be fusing some Eastern philosophies along with some Western Hermetics. We'll be looking at what and how to develop your own spiritual practice that is in alignment with who and you are and where you wish to go on your own personal path. And there are several other little things that will be coming up as we move forward. My hope is that this will organically unfold, much like the chambers of the Nautilus, that as we move further in towards that sweet spot of central synthesis, that there will be things that will be brought from each of those little chambers that will make us the beautiful and the whole end product that is that Nautilus itself. I would say that as we are moving forward in these studies and on whatever path it is that you personally are pursuing for yourself, that you begin to build your own temple of devotion, that you begin to see what your own path of service may organically evolve to be. That temple that I have now, this altar of devotion that I have built, all traces back to that one singular experience on that stage, when actually for that time, now that I have more of a foundation and a learning knowledge to draw from, what I tapped into was a thought form that had been created by a famous ballerina of an image of a beautiful etheric creature and what that swan would feel, what that swan would look like in her movements after being shot and after also falling to earth, but maintaining that dignity and that grace and that beauty that we think of as a swan. This was magic, the magic of thought forms, the magic of my offering up devotion to, for all intents and purposes, an archetypal image that then became the reality that I was able to manifest, that I was able to somehow tap into and shapeshift into, in reaching into the astral energy that had been built around this. And as I said, this was a very noted piece of performance that Pavlova was exemplary. She was the one who originally danced this, the choreography by Fokine and the music by Saint-Saëns, and it was her image that enabled me to magically step into this place of a thought form that became so strong that that thought form became who and what I was in the expression of it. And it was an extraordinary gift that I was able to be a recipient of. As we move forward and you begin to think about your own temple and your own altar of devotion and your own path of service, I want you to also think back, because we all have those pivotal points at some point in time in our chronology, not always necessarily as a child. Often, though, there is something in our childhood that we just kind of you know, take for granted, or we just think, oh yeah, that was kind of cool, but that was just my imagination, and all of those things. We all have something that we can say opened us up experientially to a world or worlds that otherwise we would have no knowledge of. And we can also say that in looking back at those things, those are the things who now inform who and what you are at this present moment on this particular path. So I would say look to your early stories, and I'm sure that you will realize and awaken to the potentials that you can carry forward now and make use of the information that you have gathered from that point to this point, and identify it, give it a name, give it a tangible quality, and then something that you may actually choose to expand upon as you move forward in your studies. My blessings to you, and I thank you for joining me in this introduction. The next video that I will be offering to you will be called Weaving the Many Paths of Teaching. And in that video, I'm going to give you a little bit more information about some of the experiences that I have had before we dive right into the videos that I'll be posting that will have more theory and more spiritual and magic tech. But I do want you to always remember that as you move forward on your journey, each step along the way is building a foundation of something great that only you have the ability to manifest. Blessings until we meet and see each other again. Have a wonderful day.